welcome to Wizards vs. Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Valhalla by Ari Bach. Would you like to do the plot, or shall I?
I'll try, and then you can fill in the gaps, because you've read it more recently than I have. So, Violet is a disaffected, aimless Scottish teenager in a dystopian future. Not sure what she wants to do with her life. And then her family is brutally murdered in front of her, and she decides to pursue a life of violence.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think I want to give any more than that away. At least not before the spoiler zone.
Yeah, fair.
So let's head right on to...
Are there wizards?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Lesbians?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. Yes. Okay. So
do they
check.
Fight? Yes. Yes, they do. And also work together because they're wizards on both sides.
Yep. It totally qualifies.
Absolutely.
Why should you read this book?
It's tightly plotted. It's very fast paced. There's never a moment where it really drags, I don't feel like. It's highly entertaining. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the things that worry me about this are deliberate choices. I think this book is doing several things that are very clever, but I could be completely wrong.
Fair enough. I would say that this book took me on a real journey.
Yes,
and which is part of why I didn't want to give more of it away, because the happiness that I got out of this book was in my conception of what I was reading changing over the course of it.
Yes.
And it sounds like I ended up in a completely different place than you did, but it'll be interesting to sort of see how that matches up as we go forward.
And actually, I should correct myself. It really doesn't drag in the first half.
That is precisely correct. As a matter of fact, I would say I would actually heartily recommend reading about the first half of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as to why you shouldn't read it.
Well, one reason is that reading this book is a lot like hanging out with a Nordic heavy metal fan who's really into Norse runes. And it's like, probably you're just a nerd, but maybe you're not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that by the time that I got through this book, I could pretty much pinpoint the author's political stance, and I don't think the author's a fascist.
Oh, I absolutely don't think the author's a fascist, but there's a thing where people are really, really, really into the things that are also red flags for the people who want you dead. And it's just a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. Okay, I don't think you're into these things in that way, but boy, are you really into these things.
Fair enough. I would say that a reason not to read this book is that it is technically awful.
Yes, also that.
It's very bad. It's very badly done. And if that's a problem for you, then you probably shouldn't read this. But if you want something that's interesting and you don't mind that, at least the first half of this is quite interesting.
I would say at no point in reading this book did I think this was a good book, but I nonetheless, at no point was I tempted to put it down, even in the end when it's starting to really drag.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you there. But yeah, no, I don't. But yeah, no, there is plenty of content in here which might remind you of things that are overtly evil, which I don't think is what is going on here.
Right, and I should note
that might be a reason not to read it.
And I should note, I was not speaking metaphorically. This book is deeply enamored of heavy metal and Nordic shit.
Yes, but it's like, it's not deeply enamored with, like church burning Norwegian black metal. It's deeply enamored with Metalocalypse.
That's fair. See, this is one of these things where, I do not understand the finer distinctions of metal. Again, I did not come away from this thinking that the author was a fascist. I just, this is, again, a book about where the heroes are a paramilitary, ultra-violent group who use mostly Norse mythology symbolism, and are and are really into going around committing random acts of violence.
Yes. If you put all of the ways in which this book is like weird / poorly executed aside, it is like a spy, like, James Bond stuff, or like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff with lesbians. And on that basic level, you might enjoy it if you're into that kind of thing,
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
Let's see. Content warnings are
abound.
Many of them. Cannibalism again. What is it with cannibalism?
Well, I mean, in the case of the previous book, cannibalism is part of a long tradition of Chinese literature. This book is absolutely not it's just in conversation.
One very weird dude.
Right. Yes, weirdly eroticized cannibalism.
Yes. On the part of the person who I suspect to be the author XP.
The villain?
And yeah.
Okay.
We'll get into that.
Yeah. No. Like I'm already half sold on this argument of yours, and I haven't even heard it yet. Just so much violence, ridiculous amounts of violence. Really quite graphic violence. None of it sticks, which is an interest, or very little of it sticks.
It is largely consequence free. Yes.
Sort of. And some light body horror. People just doing really terrible things with a great deal amount of glee.
An enormous amount of enthusiasm about violence and like weird primness about sex, which you may think is familiar from, for example, American pop culture.
Yes, it's absolutely. There's very little threatened sexual violence, except for, again, the extremely eroticized cannibalism. I mean, there's the thing where one character has to have sex that she doesn't want to have, but she is choosing to do it.
It's for the mission.
For the mission. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll come up with more things.
I'm sure.
This book also contains a bunch of racial and gender humor and just a bunch of lame jokes. But let me take you on my journey through reading this book. And
all right. Absolutely.
So come with me to the spoiler zone. Spoiler zone. And thanks to my friend Fabian for making the intro. Link to his stuff in the description of the episode. So can I just sort of
please go
bring
for
you
it.
through what I thought this book was?
Absolutely.
So at the beginning I was like, this is weird. I don't know whether this is like going to be like actively Nazi or not. Because it does sort of give you that at the beginning. You think, well, there's a lot of like there was a lot of material even before we get to Valhalla itself, which suggests that this book is like nostalgic for an imagined past where men and women of violent action shaped the world around them.
Yes.
But then I started like my reaction to the author went from distrust to oh buddy. And that happened around the time that our hero gets gifted child syndrome at basic training, which is possibly the funniest thing that I've ever seen. Or would be if it weren't that after that she, who is undiagnosed autistic, gets to go to Autism Heaven.
Yes.
Which is just like I was not expecting Valhalla to be the place where like all of the textures are really nice to touch and all the lighting is really soft and golden, and you get your childhood bed and all of your like toiletries and stuff are like just so the way that you like them, and you don't have to worry about your clothes because you just have one article of clothing that you get to wear all the time, which is perfectly comfortable, and and you get like a special like stim toy / pet that is made out of your own personal chest.
And also turns into a deadly weapon. Like this is absolutely, neurodivergent teenage dream world.
Yes. And so I was like, oh my God, is this author like some really precocious young teenager, which would because I never look up information about the author. And
Of course not. The author's dead.
right, exactly. And but then as we got through the Valhalla part and sort of got into the plot of the book proper, I was like, oh no, I've made a mistake. This isn't a teenager book. This is a grandpa book. When I was a kid, I was tasked to edit a novel that a friend of my grandfather's had written, which was a sexy spy novel starring a woman, which was terrible. But it was all about it. But it was basically, it had the same sort of like, here is the woman object, the omniscient third person narrator. First time we've had an omniscient third person narrator in this podcast. Is going to tell you about her emotions and her logic.
Yes.
And, you know, all of the things that affect her and the way that she grows, and, you know, is going to impart his knowledge about how the world works through this breasting, boobly, sexy lady. And this author is much less overtly horny than that dude was, but it's still, but the horniness is still present.
Oh, is the horniness present, just in a really
Yes.
weird way.
And so I was like, oh no. And I started to recognize like pop culture references and jokes that mean that this author is at least my age. Almost certainly.
Or is really into media from like our generation. Could be a
Yeah,
younger,
you
but
know.
I get the impression that the author is of our generation.
You don't use zelig as a verb and think that you don't even have to explain it unless you're older than me.
That's fair. There's also a really dumb joke about yuppies, which very much strikes me as somebody who's our age.
Yes,
older.
exactly. This is the sort of stuff that I was like, these are the sort of jokes that I was making in middle school.
Yes.
In the mid-90s. So
This book is very 90s.
it is extremely 90s. I mean, it's cyberpunk for a start, and we always like, ooh, you know, a little warm bath of nostalgia. But this is also a different kind of nostalgia, because as is sort of revealed at the end, if you, as I did, go and look at this person's website, the author is dead, but he's also a kind of guy who was ubiquitous on the internet when I was young, and which you don't see anymore, not because they've gone away, but because those were the only people on the internet back then.
And now
Everybody is on the internet. Exactly. But
Yes.
you see them sometimes and you're like, oh, man, I remember when guys like this were the only people you could find. And and I would describe the author as like a Reddit atheist, basically, with whatever flavor of neurodivergence. You know, author's dead, maybe just very good at writing that. But and so by the end of it, I was like, wow. The payoff at the end, at the very end of the book, where he says the author is best known for his work for his humor blog factsijuστmadeup.tumblr.com. It's
That's
like just
right.
the icing on the cake at the end. Where it's just-
It's like, oh, so the author is also an old kind of big Tumblr name.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. That was my journey through this book. Thank you for allowing me to share.
So my journey through this book is that I spent the first section of it thinking that this was some sort of extremely, not extremely, but that this was some sort of Ender's Game parody.
Sure.
Right? That, you know, the very sort of omniscient, didactic voice happens, but, you know, right in the book very early on starts off with the main character being really annoyed that she is surrounded by these over-explaining...
Normies.
Well, no, but that she is surrounded by this, like, internet that is a didactic, that's, you know, full of this didactic, condescending voice. And, like, the voice of the narrator really is the exact tone of the voice that of the, like, normie internet, you know, nanny state that she's trying to break free of.
Yes.
And so, you know, again, I was like, I can't tell if this is a deliberate authorial choice or if this is, because if it is, it's quite clever. And if it's not, then it's an interesting coincidence. And, you know, and the basic training thing really does kind of read like a parody of Ender's Game, where everything is being set up, you know, where everything's being set up so that the gifted child gets bullied and then the gifted child beats everybody up, or in the case of Ender, you know, kills them. And in the usual sort of Ender's Game model, this is taken as a sign that, oh, good, this is exactly the kind of deadly child weapon that we want. And in this, they're like, no, you're not allowed to seriously injure your entire training squad, which is why, she has to go join the paramilitary group. We're like, oh boy, you beat up your entire training squad.
It should be noted that in the course of beating up her entire training squad, she kicks the girl who has a crush on her in the face and knocks her front teeth out. And the girl respects her even more for it.
And I'm still not sure about the authorial voice, because it does get... it does change a little bit as the book settles into Valhalla. But
it does, yes.
But then it does sort of become more of a spy novel. And I think as that, like, the whole thing, the book for me really lost steam after she captured What's-His-Face.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's the natural ending of that arc.
Right, that is the natural ending.
Because we don't care about all this other stuff.
We really don't. And so, that's, for me, that's where the book should have ended. And the rest, I don't even remember very well. I mean, there's double crossing, and there's more double crossing, and there's...
I really started to skim.
There's a villain who favorably compares himself to Trump and Torquemada.
Yes.
Of the Inquisition, because these are like his great models, and the idea that you can mention the like you mentioned these two in the same breath is like, well,
yes, Trump is a model of religious zealotry also, which is an interesting,
a really
sort of
interesting
SF historical take.
Right, exactly. Also the idea that like he's on the level of the Inquisition.
Yes.
There
are a bunch of things in here where it's like, okay, is this what level is this joke operating on?
Right.
And it's like, and there are a number of, and this is also like very much a person of our generation kind of thing, where you like dance on the edge of the irony. I choose to believe that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. To some degree, it doesn't matter, but it's just so sometimes I sort of go out of my way to be like, well, maybe the author is doing this deliberately, and it feels like a stretch. But in this case, I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, it's like I don't know how self-aware the author is about his sort of all religion is evil, and we're including Nazis among religionists and that kind of thing, rhodomontade here. But I don't really care, because the end result is that I'm marinating in this worldview anyway, and it's not really a satire of this worldview, because one gets the sense that what he really wants to spend his focus on is all of the violence, which is unfortunately the least interesting part of what's happening here. You can sort of just skim all of the mission sections and just catch up in the aftermath to see what has actually happened, and the author will tell you, because there is absolutely no subtlety.
No.
Or metaphor, or
no.
He wants to make sure that you don't want to miss anything, with the possible exception of some of the pop culture references, which are like taken, like not even like they're just stolen. I mean, and that's another thing where it's like, where's the line between referencing a joke that somebody else has made and using a joke that they made as if it were your own? Like the character, and God save us from the written dialect. There's a lot of that here, but there's no hard and fast rules for writing. Anybody who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something. But that being said, writing out dialect phonetically, you better be really sure about what you're doing. There's a character here who ends all of his words in S's, which is an obvious reference to the cartoon Metalocalypse, which is about like cartoonishly over-the-top brutal metal band that's full of comedy like body horror and mutilations and such. Because that's how 2 out of 4 of the main characters in that book talk, or in that cartoon talk. And the even the last name of the gangster brothers, the Cray brothers, that's not even a reference to a comedy, but there were a real life Cray gangster brothers in the UK in the 70s. But the fact that these Cray brothers specialize in nailing people to things is a reference to the Monty Python sketch about those Cray brothers. See, the fact that I know this means that this guy and I must share a cultural base, a cultural stew that this is arising out of, which makes me feel kind of confident in saying that there's nothing particularly interesting going on here.
So maybe read this book and you'll get some fascinating insight into Isaac.
Yeah, it's another one of those that makes me go like, ugh, I don't know if I actually want to write a book, but lest it turn out like this. But it does feel like a fun sort of return to an older time, both in terms of like, because the other hint that the author is our age is that there's a lot of just unreconstructed racist and sexist jokes in here, which I guess we probably should have mentioned in the in the content warnings. You read this? Like I was like, the part where it really that shoe dropped was like, will they train us how to use sex for to infiltrate people? And it's like, you are female, this, right? Intrinsically.
And it's this incredibly awkward dialogue, though, right? Because it's your female, instinct covers sex. But the thing is that they tell the exact same thing to the male guy who they recruit next. Like, word for word, your male, instinct covers sex.
Yes. The character in question is named Varg, and he has a total of 3 personality traits. 1, he believes in justice. 1, he has high self-esteem. And 1, he likes to fuck. And that's his comedy bit. He's fucking here, he's fucking there, he's fucking everywhere. And it's hilarious. It does feel like it's slightly smarter than,
Like, that's gotta be deliberate, because, why... How else would you do that? And it's not like the dialogue is great in this book, but that really stands out as a particularly weird, clunky dialogue.
I think that,
and and like Vibs, the first time Vibs repeats it, so like they really, the book really wants you to notice this, and then it does happen again, but with the genders swapped. So,
yes, it's also a world where that is in theory like race and gender equal, except that all of the authority figures are men, and all of the people from different races are from those races, like Comedy Central casting.
And of course, the idea that this perfect aesthetic is Nordic.
Yes. I should point out, like, there's an evil Russian lesbian Christian zealot in here who has taken the name Mishka, which is a man's name. I don't know. It's one of those things, again, did you just fuck that up, or is that a joke? Was that on purpose? The tone of the book up until Violet gets to Valhalla is very serious. It's only when she is among her own people that we can make jokes. There's maybe something powerful in there about how your life doesn't really begin until you find your found family, if you're neurodivergent or otherwise othered. It's a shame that the jokes are so bad. It's very strange. And it's like he gives, and his... her brother's named Sasha, which we would think of as a woman's name. It's like,
but Sasha is also a man's name.
Yes, it is also a man's name. But it's like, but again, it's like, is that the joke? Is this a joke? Did you just miss it? What's going on here? But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those books that's like very funny, but none of the actual jokes are.
Yeah.
And like all of the sort of set pieces that are supposed to be funny are also very, very 90s. Like there's a walrus in the base, or we're going to listen to Prodigy's "Smack My Bitch Up" while we duel. It's like, oh, that's so random. You know, it's very, very, very 90s, and not the kind of 90s that we tend to be nostalgic for.
Yeah, but it is very. Wait, who's nostalgic for the 90s?
I am. I don't know.
Which half of the 90s?
I'm mostly nostalgic. Well, I mean, I was going to say I'm mostly nostalgic for the way people dressed in the late 90s, but that's all back now, so I don't even have to be.
I gotta say, science fiction is a lot better than it was in the 90s.
Oh, yes. No, 100%. Like, I guess we're going to go on this tangent. I'm nostalgic for, like, a lot more weird media made its way through the gate. Like, with budgets.
Okay, with budgets. But, like, the thing is that we can access a plethora of weird art that we never would have had access to in the 90s.
Yeah, no, that is also 100% true. Like, when I say I'm nostalgic for the 90s, I'm not saying I think the 90s were a better time, besides the fact that the other shoe hadn't dropped on the whole, global situation, and we could believe that things were going to be okay still.
On the other hand, they didn't have an effective treatment for AIDS until halfway through the 90s, and even then it took a couple years to disseminate.
Yeah. Try being gay in high school in the 90s.
I did.
It went great. These days remember.
Actually, it did go great because I went to the weird high school for the gay and neurodivergent children of Atlanta. But
yes, indeed. But we've strayed a little bit.
We've strayed.
From our,
Anyway, the point is, I am not particularly nostalgic for the 90s, but Isaac is absolutely right that, boy, this feels very 90s. This book would have been so popular at my high school.
So, I mean, there's a bit of the old Johnny the Homicidal Maniac afoot, I suppose, since you mention it. But it's not quite as smart as that.
I don't know, when was the last time you read Johnny the Homicidal Maniac?
Yeah, that may also be nostalgic coloring that. I was definitely a teenager.
So we've really gone down a rabbit hole here. Part of that, but partly because like part of the thing with this book is that on the surface level, there's very little to dig into. It's just it's extremely violent, and very shy about sex, and like it's just. Violet's emotional arc is coming to grips with the fact that she enjoys extreme violence, and and being able to find a place in the world where they appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just sloughing off the last of the societally implanted shame that keeps her from being who she really is. So I want to circle back to a couple of things.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start with the first thing that I wanted to say and didn't get to say, which is that I think that the whole it comes naturally to you to use sex as a weapon thing and the awkwardness of that dialogue is just every time that sex comes up, the dialogue becomes that awkward.
That's true.
As does the behavior. And my favorite phrase in the book is, until Mishka and Vibs were nearly sexually active.
Right.
Which the narrator says.
Also, there's a fascinating thing in that scene because in the whole thing where Vibs is going undercover to chase after Mishka, the traitor, who's also Vibs' ex-girlfriend, where the one because there's the thing where she has to pretend to be close to Mishka and be in love with her again and sleep with her, but the only time where this and obviously when you do that, the risk in this standard kind of story is that the protagonist will, start to believe the things that they're acting and, will start to re-sympathize with and feel, and like maybe fall a little bit back in love with the person that, that they're infiltrating. But in this case, her moment of horror where actually she feels good is when she lands a punch on Mishka when they're sparring. Like, really is, violence has.
Violence has eaten sex.
Violence has eaten sex.
It's just swallowed
exactly.
it whole, in much the same way that Mr. Cray swallows Violet.
Yes.
Non-fatally.
I mean, fatally, but she gets better.
The other thing that I was going to say is that the jokes that are supposed to be jokes aren't funny, but this book is still very, very funny, and it's not an I'm laughing at the book kind of way either.
Right.
Like, I think the idea that when we've been introduced to the fact that Violet is clearly autistic, and then it says, little did she know that she had a warrior's soul.
Right.
Like, that's so funny. Like, the idea that that all that swords and sorcery stuff, the barbarians, that Conan the Barbarian was just autistic, and that's why he was like that.
So I will note, and maybe this should actually go into the, why you should read this book or content warnings or whatever. But the thing is that this book is very much the 90s idea of autism, where being autistic and being a sociopath are kind of the same thing.
Yes, which not entirely, because Violet does feel other emotions besides bloodlust and annoyance at other human beings. She does in fact feel love, and she feels jealousy, and she feels guilt. She's just like...
But she never, ever, ever feels remorse.
No, she feels remorse too. She feels, not remorse for killing people, but but she feels remorse for letting her friends get hurt. Even when they're going to be immediately put back together.
That's true.
Probably what she feels is shame, not remorse. It's the other side of the gifted child syndrome coin. If you believe you should be able to do anything when you can't do something, it really fucks you up. It's a good thing she lets go of that and embraces her murderous passions. Here's my dirty little secret, is that I feel a certain, this isn't me, obviously, because I don't think this is anybody, but this feels aspirational to me. If you, for example, grew up as a kid who was bullied a lot and treated to, the gifted child barracks beating, in one way or another, or many ways, the idea that you could just feel okay with treating everybody like insects because they're so their presence is so intolerable to you, and you're so unable to understand how they behave, that stirs something very deep and old inside of me. It's I think the wish fulfillment here actually starts at not at the super cool James Bond, I'm gonna blow up an entire weapons platform by myself part, but in the I experienced trauma and it didn't affect me part.
Right. No,
that's the wish fulfillment.
That's a really good point. She's basically immune to experiencing trauma, to getting PTSD from, her family is brutally murdered in front of her, and she's like, guess I'll join the army. And it's presumably she's sad about it. But it doesn't really affect.
She's mostly sad about not being sad about it.
Yeah.
She's mostly feels guilty about not feeling guilty about it. Which is something that, I think is relatable.
Right. And she, and she gets brutally murdered and eaten alive. First eaten alive and then murdered. And again, this doesn't really affect her. Or at least she's not willing to acknowledge that it affects her. It kind of obviously does, because when she captures the guy, instead of executing him, she keeps him in a weird walrus ice prison, and talks to him all the time until he becomes her personal guru, sort of.
Well, it's sort of like if I'm daydreaming about hurting a person who hurt me, and I want to kill them, and I want to tell them about how wrong they are, and at the same time, it's nice to be able to do both of those things. One after another, and perhaps in perpetuity. But yeah, no, I don't think that this book is actually buying into the, autistic people are sociopaths. I think it's buying into, or I think it's noticing something that is really true about a kid who's a certain kind of way and has been come up a certain way, which is not the same as actually being a sociopath.
Right.
I remember back in college when I was like, I wish I was a sociopath. I wish it was that easy for me.
I remember back in college too, with you. But no, but my point isn't that that Violet is a sociopath, or that but this is she is a kind of autistic character that, again, has mostly left us after the 90s.
Yes.
Where her autism is also looks a lot like being a sociopath.
Yeah. Well, I should also make clear that this book does not ever say that she's autistic. It just makes it very obvious.
I mean, but, like she's very much the autistic serial killer.
Yes. And like, but there's an emotional like ambiguity around that, and around like the reaction that one has to growing up in a world which is just like unbelievably loud and scary and unmanageable. That I felt a certain resonance here. As I said, when we got to Valhalla, I was like, oh man, I would give you a hug, author of this book.
Right, which ties back into my point, where it really is kind of it is definitely in conversation with Ender's Game.
Yes, I agree completely.
And, because this is, that's why the main thing I remember about Ender's Game is the extremely smug forward where Orson Scott Card is like, well, adults tell me that, this book is bad for gifted children, but the gifted children tell me that this book is the only thing that understands them. So clearly I'm right. And, it's very much, it is about wish fulfillment for a certain kind of gifted child. That's also about and feeding this complex that, you deserve to have all of your inner rage and violence catered to because you are special.
If we were doing a different podcast, I'd like to do an Orson Scott Card episode. Focusing not on Ender's Game, but on the series of books he wrote about the young boy who gets to run nudely through the woods learning how to be a warrior from an oiled up, naked native man.
Very
but anyway. Those are the Alvin Maker books, and I might be exaggerating slightly because I read them back in middle school, but not by much. Having said that, yes, finally, on to the villain, Mr. Cray, the smart one of the classic, Brute and Glob, the smart one and the violent one, Gangster Brothers, who's supposed to be like, who's Moriarty essentially. They do some like Napoleon of crime bullshit when they're describing him at some point, and the reason that I call him the author XP is because he has a larger emotional internal universe than anybody else in this book.
Yes, and he is the only, and he gets to, his voice in some ways, it's not the exact same as the narrator's voice, but he speaks in a similar cadence in certain ways, including that sort of weirdly didactic, let me explain to you how the world works.
Exactly. No, but no, let me explain to you how the world works. And he saw right through her, but she saw right through him, and he saw right through her seeing right through him. And they have this, like erotic emotional dance with each other.
Right.
Like erotic in the flesh way when he's like literally eating her, but also like it's a flirtation between them.
Yes, it's the relationship between the criminal mastermind and the autistic lesbian serial killer is definitely the most emotionally and sexually charged relationship of this book. Yes.
The rest, the actual lesbian relationship is just like, oh, pining, oh, I give up, oh,
maybe there
never
is
mind.
a chance.
I've accepted being an unstoppable, killing machine, so I'm going to slap you on the ass, Finn. And now we're going to play hide and seek because women, she's going to play, chase me. Hard to get is the phrase, Isaac. But yeah, no, the sort of the relationship between, oh, you saw my darkest stuff, the stuff that I'm ashamed of, but I think that I can also see, your internal darkness, and I can play on your shame. But in fact, the reason that you, the fantasy wish fulfillment character, are better than me, my self-perception character, is that you're not ashamed and you would happily eat a girl if you wanted to.
And presumably in the second or third book in the trilogy,
she may indeed. She may get her chance to do so. So yeah, that's my take on why I think that he's the author expert.
I again will return to the author is absolutely dead, but
yeah, but let's actually say the narrator expert.
Yes, and that is absolutely that's very clearly the case. So
if this book is in fact, because there are a lot of, as you say, a lot of very funny jokes that are a little bit above the level of the jokes that are actually being made in the book. If the book is in fact a very clever little dark satire, I wish it had ended before all of the boring action stuff. But kudos, because there's a lot of really funny stuff in the first half.
Right. It's just I don't know what to make of this book, but it sure is fascinating. Yeah. What a document.
What a document. Yeah. No, it felt. I don't know if I managed to get this out, but another thing that I wanted to say was that another way that it harkens back to the 90s is this feels like a self-published book from the 90s rather than a self-published book from the 2020s, whereas we've seen, the publishing industry has become so malnourished and hyper-focused on trying to squeeze money out of a few things that it no longer lets stuff like this through, or let stuff like the good books that we have read that were self-published over the last couple of years through, whereas this wouldn't have gotten through in the 90s. And so actually, I'm not entirely certain of that, but I don't think it would have. And
some very small, I don't know, some small press might have picked it up.
Could very well have been. You never know. But yeah. It brought me back to my childhood in a lot of more and less comfortable ways. Reading this one, it showed up in my dreams. It had a real effect on me.
I can tell,
which is annoying for something that is so, again, which is quite bad. It's very badly done, and it's annoying that it had the effect on me that it did.
Yeah, it really is too bad about the very draggy second half, because I don't know if I'm going to be invested enough to read the other two.
Oh my God, I would not even consider reading the other two.
I usually do just out of sheer momentum. But I probably won't, because I feel like the story has already gone on so far past when it should have ended.
Yes, indeed. But aren't you curious about the wizards, the beings of pure fear?
Yeah, those guys. No, actually, they were completely uninteresting. Yeah. What happened to her dad's body? Presumably, that will get answered sooner or later.
Oh man, I hope she has to fight her dad's zombie clone.
I hope she has to fight her dad, who's not even a zombie clone, who actually was resurrected, because
who is a policeman who therefore wants to kill her for being a weird, murderous international mercenary.
Right, exactly. And so the possibility of that might get me to read the other two, or it might not.
This is true.
Right now, I'm rereading Nicola Griffith's sequel to Hild, so that thing weighs as much as my cat, and will keep me busy for at least another day.
Love it. I mean, Alexa, that might have sounded like a humble brag, but it's Alexis's ability to read that quickly that allows this podcast to happen. So,
right. It's my ability to read quickly, and also the fact that I don't use electronics for 25 hours, for a 25-hour period once a week.
Yes,
turns out you get a lot of reading done when you don't have any screen time. But anyway, yeah, this book, I don't know. I don't know.
So since we have a little bit of time to fill here to make it to our usual length, I just want to say that, this is the sort of thing that might go without saying, but, organizations, private paramilitary organizations do exist in the real world.
Yes. And they're
not like this,
no.
obviously.
They're things like the Wagner Group.
Yeah, exactly. They're but even like smaller, more commando style ones, they essentially do is they go to the third world and they commit war crimes.
Yes.
We got into a long conversation about the phrase "the third world," which I've edited out. You can probably guess how it went. But the point that I wanted to make is that I mean, again, speaking of the '90s, there is much in this book that is in poor taste. If you think about what the actual real world equivalent of all of this is, but I do feel seen as somebody who wanted to kill and eat other children when I was young. So
well, then we should do Translation State. We should absolutely do a bonus episode on Translation State.
You're the one in charge of the episodes. If you want us to read something, we'll read it.
Yeah, well, so I think whether this book deeply resonates with you or reminds you of somebody who you're not sure you're going to be friends with or politely avoid.
Hey!
Is, going to come down to a number of factors, including what your high school experience was like.
If you read the Pern books and you were like, oh, I want a little dragonette of my own, but it would be cooler if it was a weird sort of robot insect knife.
Yeah. See, that part was absolutely wish fulfillment. And I, did spend a fair amount of time reading the book, imagining what kind of insect I would want my Tikari to be.
There you go. So I mean, yeah, there's good stuff in here, but yeah, I think that we're just going to leave it at that because we're struggling.
Thank you very much to whoever recommended this to us. Even though this did not produce the best podcast, it was a really worthwhile experience.
I had a really unique and probably valuable time.
I sure had a time reading this.
And we're apparently going right from Valhalla to Valkyrie.
Yes, I decided that we're going to do the Norse trilogy because I've got three. I've got three books that are all very interested in Norse mythological symbolism.
Do they get more fascist from here or less?
Less, but also less interesting.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Well, I mean.
We may not even do the other two. Isaac might be like, no, this is too boring. Anyway, thank you guys for putting up with this giant mess of a podcast. This is our tribute to this giant mess of a book.
Indeed,
that we are glad we
much
read.
Is. And so I would like to end this podcast with a half hour of brutal violence in tribute.
You can just fill this with some fascinating jingles.
Sure.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.